Hi, let's see. Can people see us already? And now people can see us, yes. And are we complete? We have Sophie, we have Robin, we have Bert, we have Bjorn. Yes, now we are complete. So, welcome everyone to this live stream from ChatControl to Fediverse. With tech experts and prominent members of the political movement Volt, we will discuss these two important topics. We will first hear what ChatControl is and discuss why this law is a threat to privacy and democracy. In the second half of the live stream, we will hear what the Fediverse is and discuss whether this new social media ecosystem might help us fix the internet. But first, let's introduce our speakers. Sophie 't Veld is a member of the European Parliament. She is a rapporteur on investigations of the use of Pegasus and equivalent surveillance spyware, and already since 2009, Sophie is a member of LIBE, the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. And that is the committee that will vote on the ChatControl law on Thursday. Yes, Reinier is also here. Hi, Reinier. Our second speaker is Bert Hubert, and Bert Hubert is our external expert on ChatControl. As a former government regulator and active blogger on topics related to technology and regulation, he was invited to the Digital Affairs Committee of the Dutch Parliament 2 weeks ago. We're very honored to have you here. Then we have three aspiring politicians. Bjorn Bijnon is a candidate for the Dutch Parliament. He is teaching creative and sustainable business, but Bjorn is also pursuing a PhD on the ethical considerations of the datafication of our society, focusing on AI, digitalization, and personal data ownership. Robin Twickler finished a study in artificial intelligence and afterwards a study in medicine. And she is now combining the two by working as a data scientist in the University Medical Center Groningen. And yes, Robin is also a candidate for the Dutch Parliament. Reinier van Landschot is the next one, and Reinier is the lead candidate for Volt Netherlands at the European Parliament elections next year. As he will have to deal with these kind of topics from next year on, we invited Reinier to join our conversations about topics that impact everyone. I'm Eric, by the way, a municipal council member in Enschede with a heart for anything related to digital affairs, and I'll be moderating this discussion. Now, I would like to give the word to Sophie, as you are really in the thick of this ChatControl process.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, and hello everybody. To start with, you just said that I've been a member of the Civil Liberties Committee since 2009. That's 2004, and that's not entirely irrelevant because data protection and privacy protection were amongst the first topics that I took up at the time, and people like me who were defending that were declared, well, harmless but insane. And I think today everybody understands that privacy and data protection have everything to do with our civil rights, our civil liberties, and democracy. I will just very briefly talk you through the whole legislative process, and then Bert is going to go into the details. What this is about is the detection of child sexual abuse material online, also known as CSAM, CSAM, child sexual abuse material. And we have already, I think 2 years ago, adopted a temporary law allowing providers like Facebook and other platforms to, on a voluntary basis, detect this material, and so far that principle is not very controversial. Where it becomes controversial is in particular when it's about detecting new CSAM, new sex material, and grooming, and that is done with, let's say, artificial intelligence, but Bert is going to say a lot more about this. So we have three categories. We have existing material, new material, and grooming. Now, how does it work? The European Commission is the only institution that can make a legislative proposal. In this case, the commissioner responsible is the Swedish commissioner, Social Democrat by the name of Ylva Johansson. She has made a proposal, and then the two legislators, being the European Parliament on the one hand and the Council, which is the national ministers on the other hand, They each take position, then come together and negotiate, and when they arrive at a compromise, that is then the law. This is the simplified explanation of the procedure. So Commissioner Johansson made a legislative proposal to, let's say, make the temporary law on CSAM a permanent one. Already the temporary law was extremely controversial, but we adopted it because it was temporary, and we said that the permanent law will have to be of a very different nature. But unfortunately, the proposal that she made was actually worse than the temporary law, because it basically gives access to all our communications, and so there are considerable privacy concerns, but also the technology used to detect new material or grooming is simply not good enough. And so there are huge risks of people being wrongly labeled a child abuser or what have you. Now, all the experts agree on this. Even the legal service of the council, i.e. the member states, has given a negative advice, and that is unique. That never happens. The European Council is always, they're obsessed with this kind of laws. The more data they can have on people, the better. So the fact that the legal service of the Council and then also the member states are increasingly skeptical, that tells you something. But also in the European Parliament, there is huge opposition. So neither the European Parliament nor the Council, the two legislators, have taken a position. In the meantime, information has emerged about two very disturbing elements. One is that there is a very intense lobby by a company called Torn. Torn is, or let's say the lobby is led by a sort of B-grade actor called Ashton Kutcher. You may know him or maybe not. In any case, he's not just not a fantastic actor. He is also a stakeholder in Torn. So he has a commercial interest. Torn is also working together with a very shady company called Palantir, maybe known to some of you, maybe not, but very, very shady. The founder of Palantir is one of the sponsors of Donald Trump. And so they have been conducting a very aggressive lobby inside the Commission. They've had dozens of meetings with the commissioners. There's been a lot of correspondence to and fro showing that they expect this law to bring them commercial benefits. The commissioner has so far refused to answer to these very alarming elements, but we are seeing her on Wednesday in the European Parliament, and we will ask her for proper answers, and also the answer why some previous staffers of the European Commission are now actually working for Torn. One is a member of the board of Torn and one is a lobbyist. So this is very, very disturbing, a conflict of interest on such a delicate file. And the other one, and I'm coming to a conclusion, is that the European Commission has run a very bizarre online campaign to promote this law. It was a campaign using images meant to scare people and to sort of convince them that this law has to pass, is very urgent. The interesting thing is that the Commission itself is not a legislator, and for the Commission to run such a campaign at the time where the two legislators are still working on this legislative file, that is very, very unusual. I've never seen that before, and in particular, as it is targeting specifically the countries which in the Council are opposing this proposal. So the Commission is interfering in the legislative process, which is maybe in itself not a crime, but it's definitely undemocratic. And apparently this online campaign has actually violated the rules of the GDPR, the Data Protection Law, and also the Digital Services Act, which has just entered into force. So summing up, there's a very strange obsession with this law in the European Commission, very actively interfering in a process which is actually up to the two legislators. In the two legislators, there is no majority for the time being, so the process is kind of well, stalled, if you want, and I'm not really sure where it will go. But it's one of the most delicate and smelly files that we have dealt with in many years.
Thank you so much, Sophie, for this introduction, and really, well, you're saying it's not democratic. It doesn't sound democratic what the European Commission is doing. So then I would like to give the floor to Bert Hubert for a more sort of a technical introduction of this law.
Yeah, now I'm unmuted, so I hope you can hear me. So if you were angry already, you will become much more angry right now. Because Sophie very correctly described how this law, what a strange path this law has taken, that it's very weird how urgent this is, how all the lobbyists are behind it, where there are commercial encumbrances in it. So first, who am I? I used to be a government regulator, and so-called independent authorization body, as it is known in European law. And this new CSAM law also requires an independent authorization board. So I have some sort of feeling with what that would mean, especially in terms of proportionality. I'm going to tell you how terrible this law is and what it really means, because we really need to carpet bomb this law. Not only do we need to make sure that it doesn't get passed, everyone that promoted it should feel bad. So what does it actually mean? What is the proposal? The idea is that they say, look, child pornography or CSAM is like really bad, and it is really bad. But it's being spread via interpersonal communication services, like phone calls and text messages, WhatsApp, Telegram, Facebook Messenger, that kind of stuff. And the Commission has decided that they need to be able to issue a detection order, and this will likely go to WhatsApp. And the detection order says, look, you must detect all known CSAM material, all unknown CSAM material, and you must detect it when people are trying to groom children for CSAM stuff. And this is and how does that need to happen? Well, that is really up to you as a telecommunication service provider. But if you do encryption, like WhatsApp and Signal and the other places do, you must do this detection of material on the phone. So that means that your own phone is going to detect if your messages or your photos or your movies are CSAM stuff. And let's say that the algorithm on your phone decides that this photo is child pornography. They will send a message to Facebook, and then Facebook will relay that message to the European Union, and the European Union will immediately relay your message to Europol and a local police force. And that means that if you do any CSAM, and CSAM stands for child sexual abuse material, if the algorithm says that, look, that photo was wrong, quite soon your photo will be in the hands of a local police station, and they may launch an investigation into you. Now, this is of course a very scary thought, because I will be using my phone differently if I know that the EU has installed a scanner, an artificial intelligence scanner that's going to rate my communications. And if the rating is wrong, then you go to the police. Well, the police comes to you, actually. That is sort of the start of it. Now, I want to emphasize just how incredibly weird this is. So we have enshrined a right to privacy. That's in for most countries, it's in the Constitution, it's in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, it's in the European Convention on Human Rights. So we have 3 layers of protection. And here the EU has said, well, we're just going to apply the scanner to all of you. That is for the proportionality test. Usually when we say we're going to apply this measure, we're going to say we're going to target it to specific criminals or to specific groups that we know are causing problems. So first we have to know they are causing problems, and then the new law will apply to you. In this case, they have said, no, everyone in the EU is actually a suspect. We're going to scan all of your communications. And that influences how people feel. Now, Why do we need to carpet bomb this regulation? As I said, this law is wrong in theory. So you cannot say that everyone in Europe is a suspect. The law is also wrong in practice, because what we hear from the actual professionals that are trying to protect children, they say, we do not want this law. Because you should realize our focus is on protecting children. We want to do the right thing for children. Detecting a lot of child pornography could potentially do something good for children, because if there is no market for the material, then maybe there's also less child abuse, so that would be good. But what they say is that this will lead to an enormous amount of investigations of people who have done nothing wrong. And you have to realize that if you are investigated by the police while you are innocent, that is extremely harmful. Because we may think, oh, I will tell the police officer that this was an innocent photo and there was nothing wrong, and then the police will go away. The police will not go away. Because once they have the material, they almost have to launch an investigation. It's very hard for a police force to say, we got a photo and it looks suspicious, but we're not going to do anything with it. So we're going to actually harm people by doing unjustified investigations against them. And this itself will harm children, because maybe it was just their innocent photo. The third thing I mentioned, the reason why this law is so bad, is that we have existing European case law that says that we have such a thing as essential civil rights. So the EU Charter tells us that we have a right to privacy, and there are rulings that say that if you violate these rights too heavily, then it can never be proportional, and it's just wrong. So we are talking about a law that is just wrong in essence. So I'm told I need to round off, so I could make you ever more angry. The more I tell you about this law, the angrier you will get. So I will round off now, because I assume you're now sufficiently angry. What should we do? And here's a few important things. If we want to argue against this law, it is very good to talk about things that people would personally feel bad about. Like you get this letter from the police that says the EU reported a suspicious photo, we're going to investigate you. That feels bad for everyone involved. If you want to hold a story about how this endangers end-to-end encryption, realize that most people do not know what end-to-end encryption is. So it's far more important to talk to things that people are personally worried about. And I'm going to round it off with this, because I hear that Sophie already wants to improve on my messaging a bit. And so I kindly give the floor to Sophie.
Can I add one sentence? Yeah, just very quickly, because I think I'm indeed angry, have been angry about these things for a very long time. But I think we need to clarify one thing. Everybody is united in the fight against child sexual abuse. That is not the point. The point is that this law, or at least the two parts of the law that are trying to detect new sexual abuse material and grooming, are not based on actual acts. There is more consensus about existing material where we know, that has already been flagged up with the authorities as being actual child sexual abuse material. So the point is that everybody's always trying to portray this as, oh, these people who are just, concerned with the right to privacy, where actually we need to protect these children. That is not the black and white choice that we have. It is entirely possible to protect children and detect this material without this draconian law, or at least in this draconian form. And I think we have to make that very clear, because we're always being accused by the advocates of this law, and also by the European Commission, of not wanting to protect children. And I very firmly reject that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that addition, Sophie. And also thanks, Bert, for your introduction. I'll first ask our three candidate politicians to give a reply. So Bjorn, can I start with you? What are you thinking? What goes through your mind? The sports question after hearing all this. Are you angry?
I'm very angry. Yes, but I think we're all pretty aligned on how angry we are at this type of legislation, and also how long we've already had this conversation. And I'll keep it very short, but one of the first things that comes up in my mind is that the right to privacy is a human right, and that we keep on having this conversation over and over again, that for the sake of safety, we are allowed to break some of these human rights. And safety in itself is always, to some extent, used, especially within the tech discourse, to really find what the limits are of what tech companies are allowed to do. And I think for one time, it might be good that the public and therefore governments decide what, in the first instance, the limits are, what tech is able to do. So when it comes to this type of legislation, it makes me not only angry, it makes me also question to what extent the normal itself is up for commercial good, that it has become a commodity in itself. When Sophie was also speaking of the company, what was its name, Torn, which is linked to Palantir, it makes me confused, but also not surprised at the same time that it is, again, these surveillance types of companies that are, again, trying to normalize surveillance, first for the sake of safety, so that it might in the end become normal on a more cultural level, that surveillance can happen. Well, in your introduction, Eric, you also mentioned I'm a lecturer. I teach students, and I can already tell that my students, which are pretty above average when it comes to the way that they are addressing this topic, in what possible alternatives are, if it's urgent to step into this and have more research on it, think more critically about it, and that they already find it so hard to think of overall alternatives of legislations or overall what they want, because they're already so much steered by the companies that they're using the platforms of. And that it's me who is telling the 20-something-year-old what end-to-end encryption is. I think the underlying problem was already tackled in what Bert already suggested, with that a majority of people don't know stuff like end-to-end encryption or what their meaning is, but also don't care too much about what it exactly is. And that's because we might have made it too complicated by focusing too much on legislation and how that relates to stuff like end-to-end encryption, but we should make it maybe a bit more directed towards the specific challenges that people are facing when it comes to privacy. So that's my first response. The response is maybe overall we need to speak of what are the things that we are normalizing now in the online world, and how do they reflect what we have normalized over the last couple of decades or centuries in the offline world. And do we want an online world that is so different from what we allow to have in the offline? That would make it a bit more tangible, I think, for anyone who's using these types of technologies.
All right, thank you so much for your reply. Then I would like to invite Robin Twickler to the floor for your first reply.
Yes, thank you. So me having a technical background, as you said in the introduction, I also do believe that people need to know what end-to-end encryption is, and maybe I'm going to burn my hands on this, but I'm going to try to explain this, because I feel like that at the moment there are lots of politicians who don't know these things, and that's exactly why these kinds of legislation sometimes get passed. So I'm going to try to explain in 2 minutes why I do not think this legislation should pass. Because at the moment online, we can safely send pictures of children on the beach to our grandparents, or we can send a picture of a skin condition to the doctor. And that makes the internet a very valuable place to society. So to create safety and privacy in this online environment, we decided to implement end-to-end encryption. And I'm going to very simplify it. End-to-end encryption means that when you send a message to someone, the messages are stored online using secret languages, like you would when you were a child. And that can only be deciphered if you are the sender or the intended receiver of the message. And the same thing goes for when you store a picture to your iCloud or to your Google Photos. So everything you do online is coded in that way. So this means it's very difficult for a hacker to read messages or see images without having access to your actual device. But as Bert said, that's also the reason why it's difficult for governments to find potential harmful messages. And that's why this legislation proposes to do client-side scanning, which is the other term I'm going to try and explain. And I think Bert already explained it quite well, but the client-side scanning means that the government will install something on your phone, and that phone will track everything before it gets encrypted and in the secret languages, so that everyone can look with you. And you can see what was actually sent. Because the government is not the original sender or the intended receiver. And it will then check for potential child abuse and will analyze all the text and all the images on your phone. So when your baby has a rash and you have a digital consultation with your doctor, they will also check this image and they will see there's a naked baby on your phone and it will get flagged, and that's very, very harmful. Not only is this a completely new method, like it has been invented 2 years ago, and still is not scientifically tested that it can actually do this thing on phones. Also, local installation makes sure that you can also look into the code. And because it works like that, you can also work around it. You can see what is it checking for? Okay, I'm not going to put that in my picture. And there's also this new thing that's called image injection, where you can actually plant things that are only picked up by the AI algorithm that will frame people into getting these flags, even though they did not do anything wrong or there's no child abuse whatsoever. So those are only a few of the enormous challenges I see as legislation, and I hope it was a bit understandable, but that's why I hope it will not pass.
Thank you so much. And I find it very valuable that you include a short explanation of end-to-end encryption. It can never be explained enough in these kind of streams. So last but not least, I would like to give the floor to Reinier. We've had a lot of reflections already, so maybe you can add yours and also open up the discussion with everyone else who has been on the podium.
Thanks, Eric. The more I learn about the proposed legislation, the happier I become that in our program for the elections that are coming up on the 22nd of November, we clearly state that we will not agree to the introduction of this new law. For me, it's as if in our urge to prevent CSAM, we are installing a camera inside the bedroom of every child in Europe. If you would tell that to anybody, they would say this is insane. And if you know enough about this proposed law, then you'll find out that it's actually not that far apart. In terms of time, I will cut out some of the stuff I prepared and just post one question, because I did hear, I think it was Sophie mentioned, we are all aligned in the fact that we should prevent CSAM from happening and from being spread. So as a constructive party, what other types of legislation could we put forward instead of this that would actually be an effective way to fight CSAM?
Yeah, so now the conversation is open for everyone. So who wants to pick up this question from Reinier? Who wants to come up with, I don't know if actually someone here also thinks of themselves as a child sexual abuse material expert, because of course.
So maybe I can comment on that briefly, because we are indeed not those experts. And it's very tempting for us to sort of theorize on what should be done, and we have no expertise. So some of us may know about end-to-end encryption. It's very valuable in this context to know that the people who are professionals, whose job this is, they say, well, whatever you want to do, it's not this. But I would very much recommend that if you want to criticize this law or provide alternatives, then we should immediately go to professionals and ask them, because it's kind of silly for us to, because I know I've been a little bit involved with CSAM investigations when I worked for the Dutch government. And from that, I learned enough to know that I know nothing.
Yeah, good point. So maybe Reinier, that's we're in the wrong panel, and maybe we should leave this solution that we need. We should leave that to the experts, not the experts of, let's say, the fundamental human rights as privacy, but more to the experts of CSAM itself. Sophie, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think there are different categories of expertise that are required, and I think. Because not everybody is opposed, as Reinier said. There is not a majority in favor in the council. In parliament, we're still debating. There's clearly not a majority in favor of the proposal as envisaged by the European Commission. But we can see, I mean, we're working on amendments, and basically, very roughly speaking, I would say that goes in the direction of excluding grooming, excluding the detection of, let's say, new unknown material, so using artificial intelligence, algorithms, what have you. And when it comes to known material, the detection orders should be very targeted. So there has already to be, as Bert also said, there has to be a suspicion or an indication or something like that. Because the right to privacy, and I've been, this has been sort of my life's mission for the last 20 years or so, so I'm very attached to it, but the right to privacy is not absolute. No right is absolute. And if, for example, we want to protect children against sexual abuse, and I think that is something that everybody in their right mind would want, then the right to privacy can be limited, but it has to be demonstrated that it is necessary and proportional. And that you can only demonstrate if you put the method next to the stated goal. Then you can determine if it's necessary and proportionate. And the problem is that we are being told all the time, oh, this is important, urgent. But we have very little information about how the used method actually works in practice. What are the results? We have no idea. And we're talking about, let's say, zillions of hits every day. And a lot of them are filtered out. But even if you have a 99% rate accuracy, which is not the case, but even then you still have 1%. And we're talking about, maybe tens of millions of hits every day, which are erroneous. So the accuracy of the systems, but also indeed the kind of invasiveness that is involved needs to become a lot more clear. And I think what may be the outcome of this, at least for the current term of the European Parliament and the Commission, is that we're going to agree on a very limited set of measures focusing on prevention and not yet, let's say, the detection and takedown and what have you. But it will have to be tackled again in the next mandate. But we need to get a lot more information about its effectiveness. And here the problem is that the companies concerned, but also the law enforcement bodies concerned, have absolutely no interest in being transparent. Because let's face it, whether it's child sexual abuse or social security fraud or terrorism or crime, what have you, our fears are a massive industry. Massive. A lot of people are getting filthily rich over our fears. And I do believe that we have to use technology in order to detect wrongdoing, to detect crime. And yes, we can use it to protect children, but we have to be very, very clear about exactly what it is that can be achieved with these methods, and then determine whether it's proportionate.
Very clear. Thanks so much. I think this afternoon there was a live stream by the European Data Protection Supervisor, and someone mentioned we saw research in academia starting about client-side scanning about 2 years ago, and now it's already in a proposed law. That's ridiculous. So Bjorn, Robin, or Reinier, is there one of you who wants to ask a follow-up question or reply to something that one of the other panel members have said? Then this
no,
is
I can actually talk about this for hours and hours about how it's such a bad idea, but I'll just get very angry, as Bert said.
Okay, can I maybe inject one final thing? this law starts all with the literally named detection order. So it says we want to detect this stuff. And then there's like 100 pages on how that works. And then there is one line that says what happens after the detection. And it says we tell the police. And that is a completely open-ended thing. That might mean one thing in Ireland. It might mean something else in Belgium. And it could be extremely scary, because this could happen on your holiday destination because the GPS coordinates are attached to the regulation. One thing you should really look at, maybe that you should not just dump this with the police and then see what happens. And the commission has just avoided their duty there. They just said, we report it to the police and good luck. And that means that we don't know what happens. And any amendments that would, for example, say the police should not start an investigation purely on a report. That should never be the only basis, or something like that. I don't know, but there's nothing in there right now, so you don't easily amend that even because there's a vacuum. But that might be a good thing to think about.
It's so vague that there's not even discussed what that CSAM entails. And maybe if you have a really right-wing anti-LGBTQ government, then you also get a problem, and you might even include rainbow flags and things like that. And that's so harmful because it's all so undefined.
Yeah, maybe if I may add one thing, because I do think that ultimately we can agree on a definition of what is child sexual abuse. And I agree with you. I mean, the previous Polish government, or the outgoing Polish government, or the Hungarian government could abuse it, but there was one more element, in particular in the current temporary law, is that the Commission didn't actually want let's say when this material is detected, for it to be reported to the European police. They wanted it to be reported to an American outfit, which is called NECMEC, but I don't have to talk about that. Because they have this giant database and they can compare, they can see if this material already exists or not. But then I think, and the American Secret Services were pushing very, very hard for this law. And you ask yourself, why? Why? So I think the Netherlands, the Dutch parliament, like many parliaments, is extremely skeptical. But it's interesting to see that the Dutch minister is pushing ahead, be it in a more limited form, but still, if I were the Dutch parliament, I would tell her, which part of no is it that you didn't understand? You don't have our mandate.
Very good point. Then if there is no one who wants a last word, I'm looking around everyone one more time. If not, then I would like to thank you very much for your time. Thanks, Sophie, for your introduction, and good luck on the further process already this week. Thanks a lot, Bert, for providing your expertise to our political movement. And thanks, Robin, for joining. Bjorn and Reinier are going to stay with us for the second panel. So now we're going to do some magic behind the scenes, change the seats, and go to a different topic. See you. All right. I think we are complete. Let's see. I don't see our banners. Oh, that's there because there's a banners on the bottom. So we're going to kick off the second part of this live stream from ChatControl to Fediverse. With tech experts and prominent members of political movement Volt, we are discussing two important topics. We just heard about ChatControl and why this law is a threat to privacy and democracy. And now we will hear what the Fediverse is and discuss whether this new social media ecosystem might help us fix the internet. Let's first introduce our newly joined speakers. We have Laurens Hof on the top left side. Laurens Hof is our external expert for this subject, who will give the opening presentation about what the Fediverse is. Laurens is a Fediverse blogger for the so-called Fediverse Report, a weekly write-up of relevant updates about the Fediverse. He's also frequently in Fediverse-related events and provides also context to other news in the world of decentralized social media. Then, in the bottom right corner, Marike Koekoek has joined us, member of the Dutch Parliament and member of the Committee on Digital Affairs. And I think even the past week, you were also busy with this topic we just discussed in a previous panel about ChatControl, because I know that you were also writing amendments on that topic. But now we're going to a different topic. So let's see. Again, we have 3 aspiring politicians. We have Imane El Filali. Imane is a candidate for the Dutch Parliament. She is currently a municipal council member in Rotterdam and works at the Ministry of Economical Affairs and Climate. And I will shortly quote from your own introduction because I found the text beautiful. Imane said, "I stand for freedom of choice, greater acceptance and tolerance in our society. I stand for more solidarity and celebration of diversity, the many faces that make up our society. We need inclusive and reliable systems that work for people from trust rather than distrust." Well, if there's any text more suitable for the topic we're going to discuss, I don't know it. Next up, we have 2 speakers who were already in our previous panel, but for those who are just tuning in, I'll reintroduce you shortly. We have Bjorn Bijnon, a candidate for the Dutch Parliament, so maybe you will become a colleague of Marike next 4 years. Bjorn is teaching creative and sustainable business, but Bjorn is also pursuing a PhD on the ethical considerations of datafication in our society, focusing on AI, digitalization, and personal data ownership. And in the top right corner, we have Reinier van Landschot, the lead candidate for Volt Netherlands at the European Parliament elections next year. As he'll have to deal with these kind of topics from next year on, which was also the same for the previous topic, we invited Reinier to join this conversation from the European perspective and also shine your light on this new thing. Again, I'm Erik Kemp, a municipal council member in Enschede with a heart for anything related to digital affairs, and I'm moderating this live stream. Now I would like to give the word to Laurens to kick off this new topic. Laurens, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for your time. Well, like the previous half an hour, Bert really, as the expert, focused on like how you should be angry about all the things that can go wrong in tech. And I hope to end this evening on a slightly more positive note of what's possible for like building a better digital future. I've been writing on the Fediverse because I think in the end, like our digital infrastructure on how we communicate as a society really is very, very important. And there's very interesting changes happening in how we currently approach what the internet currently looks like and what we want the internet to look like. So that's why I've been writing about it, and I want to give a very short update of what's there, what's possible. And really, what the Fediverse is really, well, let's first start with term. It's a portmanteau of federated universe, and I'll come back to the federated part later, because I think that's, especially for a European political party as Volt, that's actually pretty relevant. But really, I'm going to keep it at a pretty high level. Like, I don't want to get too much into the technical details here, because like nobody really is. I'm interested in that, but I don't think everybody is interested in that. I think on a way more level of like, why is it interesting? I think it's best to first explain like what our current internet actually is and how it looks like. And that's really like best summarized as 5 or 6 websites that consist of screenshots of the other 4 or 5 websites. And really, it's just 5 technical silos that are owned by American tech companies, well, and 1 Chinese one. And that is the internet. They're separate, they're owned by tech billionaires, and they don't communicate with each other. The Fediverse is like, at the end, it's an idea of how the internet can be different and how we can build a social, decentralized internet. And it's different in two aspects. First of all, it's like the idea of interoperability. Like, we now have an internet where you cannot, what's happening on YouTube is separate from what's happening on TikTok. It's separate what's happening on Instagram. What the idea of the Fediverse is really like, what if we could interoperate between those platforms? What if we could communicate? So basically, what if you watch a YouTube video and communicate with your Instagram account? Well, we don't use those platforms because, well, Google and Meta don't want us to do that, but there's like PeerTube. This live stream is also available on PeerTube, for example, and there's PixelFed and Instagram equivalents, and they do allow this functionality. So that's really the first step of like, what if we break down those barriers between those 5-6 silos on the internet and allow them to communicate with each other. The second part is really like, what if we take one of those silos and actually split it up? What if we like make it open so anybody can join? And why you would want that is really, I think you've all followed the news, and I think we don't need to go in a very big detail of what's happening with Twitter, Elon Musk, and X. Like, that's a very real concern with people. Like, what happens with one single person, one single tech billionaire owns like one of our most important communication platform for really, well, what journalism is. So that's really like the Fediverse is thinking like, okay, how can we solve for this? And their idea is really to build open platforms. So really basically allow everybody to create a Twitter and host their own Twitter, build their own Twitter, and join on their own Twitter. And why you'd want that is really because it gives control and ownership of people. Like when we talk, for example, about governments, it's really, it would be very strange to say that a government has their own website and that website is not owned by them. But when it comes to social communications, we do for some reason accept that reality. And that's really what the Fediverse is. So the idea of like, hey, anybody can start a server meaning your own version of Twitter or your own version of Instagram, your own version of you name it. And it's yours. You own the software on it, you own the data on it, and you control the interaction with it. And that's really like the core two ideas of what the Fediverse is. There's like, how that happens is with a protocol that's underneath it. Like if there's questions on it, we can get into it. But like in the end, just like email's a protocol in the end, we don't really care. We just want it to work. And I think that's really the part where we want it to be the Fediverse as well. Like you just, in the end, you want it to work. You want to communicate with your friends. You want to communicate with everybody else. And we start to see this more and more that governments are also starting to realize this. Like, hey, it's important for us to own our data. Like what I mentioned earlier, it's really bizarre. We wouldn't accept that a government cannot own their own website. So governments start to realize like, hey, that means we actually also need to own our own social media presence. So 2 years ago, the European Union set up their own presence on the Fediverse, as well as the German government. And this summer, the Dutch government did as well as the Swiss government. And why they do that is really pretty much exactly what I talked about. Like quoting here for when the Swiss government does it, they say the platform is organized decentrally and does not run via a central server. That's why beyond the control of both an individual company and state censorship authorities. So really you start to see what a government entity is about thinking about. They want to be in control and not to be dependent on what another company or other state authority thinks. So it's really about sovereign control of your data and of your social network presence. So I think I'm going to keep it, well, actually one more thing before I'm going to kick it off for comments and for a discussion. Like why should Volt care about this, like specifically? And there's two reasons for that. I think I'm going to quote I'm going to translate it on the fly from like the Dutch election program, where it says we want to create a European alternative for current social media. And especially, well, this is already in itself the alternative for current social media and why it wants it, like, etc. We can get into it. But I also find it very interesting to focus specifically on the European. Well, thank you very much for getting on the screen. Perfect, thank you. It's also the European part. One of the interesting things about the Fediverse is how European it is in the people who create it, in their thinking. It's the biggest platforms are created either by German organizations or by French organizations. And so there's already this European perspective that's built into it. And I think that's a nice, there's a nice overlap with how Volt views the internet, I think. So I'm going to leave it at that and give the floor to other people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurens, for this introduction. So now we'll go to the two speakers who we haven't heard yet, this live stream. So first, I would like to give the floor to Iman. Do you have ideas or thoughts when you hear about this introduction? And can you maybe share some general reflections on this social media landscape?
Yes, thank you. And first of all, thanks a lot for organizing this event, Erik. It's very important to do this. And also thank you, Lars, for the introduction. I think it's a very important topic, and I'm not like an expert on this. I'm a lawyer and a politician, so for me it's like very valuable to listen to you and to learn more about this. One part from the fact that we as a party think that this is important, but also as an individual. And what is striking my mind, especially when I was listening to you, is that actually two things. I think, first of all, it's very important to know more about this, to get the knowledge. Erik, you quoted one of my core values as a person, like the freedom of choice. So I was thinking, like, if you want to choose, before you can choose, you have to know what the options are. So you need to have the knowledge about what are the options on the internet that we have. And the second thing is that we have to create awareness. And I think Robin also in the first panel, I was listening behind the scenes, mentioned something about this. A lot of people, they don't really care, but they are also not aware. And I think if people get more aware about certain risks, but also about the options and the alternatives that are available, people will start to care more, I think, personally. So for me, like the thing, so two things are really important for me to maybe discuss further. So it's how can we, so knowledge and also awareness. And then I would have the question, and not sure who's going to be able to answer it, but who is responsible for this? Are you as an individual responsible to get all this knowledge and to understand what the options are? Or is there a responsibility for the government? Is there a responsibility for a political party like Volt, for example? So this is a question that I have and is striking my mind. And another thing is that I also wonder, how can we motivate people, individuals to maybe to switch to alternatives on the internet? How can we inspire them? How can we show them that it can be interesting for them? Like this interoperability, that's an interesting aspect, especially I think if you if you maybe try it and then you experience it, you think, hey, this is very interesting also for me. But that would also be a question for me, like how can we inspire and motivate people to try other options on the internet? And maybe I'll stop here and then listen to the other people as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Iman. And I think the question you ask is already, I'm very happy to say that it's already partly answered by our own electoral program, because we want media literacy education in higher education as an obligatory course, at the same as in Sweden. So, and it includes also in our electoral program the plea for also how to deal with social media. So that's, yeah, there's definitely there might definitely be a role for our government here. But for the further reflection and reply, I would like to give the word to Marieke Koekoek, a member of the Dutch Parliament. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Erik. And also thanks to for the great explanation, Laurens, on how it works, and also for mentioning how other countries have dealt already with the question of whether and how we can look for alternatives. We as Volt actually put the motion on the table in the Netherlands to follow the example of the European Parliament and of Germany, to indeed, as our national government and all the information that we put out from our national government to do that via alternative servers. So I'm really happy that that part of influence that we have, that we are using it, because I think that is what is mainly needed to actually make a transition to be less dependent on the public fora that we have now. Because I fully agree with you, Eric. I think that X, or sorry, I don't know who mentioned it, but I fully agree with the statement that X and other public fora do not work right now. So I think we all have to contribute to making a transition to public fora that do work, and so that we can actually use the full potential that internet has brought us. I mean, I think the best thing, especially from being a member of Volt, the fact that I can work and function in the Pan-European Party is because we have internet, because I have places where I can, in a safe environment, discuss my ideas with other people who have also interesting ideas and who might disagree with me. And I think where it comes to public discussion, we've completely ruined that possibility for a lot of groups, for women, for example, but also for minority groups. Because of the public fora that we have allowed to sort of establish their own rules. And I think that we as politicians can make a step towards that transition. I will not claim that we can make it happen, mainly because politicians are also subject to the certain sort of toxic relationship we have with public fora and being visible. Me leaving Twitter or X, for example, would be bad in terms of visibility, in terms of even a political career step, you could argue. That does not mean that I or others should not do it, but it is a real consideration. So this is one of the reasons why we as Volt said, okay, whatever we can do to make a transition to a new alternative server, or to a new market, you could say, we should do. And that's why we asked our national government to make transition, but also why Volt uses certain alternatives. Not perfectly, I will admit right away, but we've tried. We've made one step, and I, in my work in the Digital Affairs Committee, have also come to know other companies, other people who use alternatives as well, and who use them next to the what I should call the mainstream social media. So, for example, certain NGOs, they have a Facebook page so that people know how to reach them, but they also have an alternative forum on their website, and they present it next to each other. And I think if the broader question is asked how as society we can make that step, that's the way to do it, to show people, as Imane said, that there are alternatives and that they are just as reachable and accessible as the ones that we have come to know. And that is, that will hopefully create like a first small step. And the more we do it as governments or businesses with influence, the more it will be easier, or the easier it will be for people to actually, to regular individuals, to make that step as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a beautiful plea, and I think it makes total sense to not abandon your ship, your well-known ship, from one day to the other, and then go into unknown waters with an unknown ship. So for this live stream, we're live streaming on PeerTube, but this is the first time that we are live streaming on PeerTube. So on the website voltnederland.nl/live, there's also a YouTube button. If it suddenly breaks, then people can go to their known ship and safely travel, although they might not like that ship. Yeah, so thanks a lot. Let's go to Bjorn. Bjorn, what do you feel and think when you hear about this new social network ecosystem?
I get very happy when I hear all these things because it's one of the first things that really pops up as an actual alternative. And over the last couple of years, since we have had the internet and social media platforms, we simply see that users are somewhat being suppressed in their imagination of alternatives for what the internet could look like. And that's because these platforms have become so native to the average user that it's very hard to distinguish if there is an alternative for YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram, or whatsoever. A majority of the things that I wanted to say have already been said by Imane and Marieke, so I won't repeat all of that. But I want to focus a bit more on what I've also said in the first panel, so kind of to sound like a broken record, but who gets to decide what the normal is now? And I think when it comes to the normal on the internet or in our online lives, it's finally that we're starting now with a majority to acknowledge that the public is now able to decide what that normal is going to be, or at least would like to take the initiative a bit more after 20 years of these tech platforms in which they are understanding that their ideas are being suppressed or that they are being commodified and that they don't like that idea. But on the other hand, when I talk to the average user, such as my mom, she couldn't care less of going to another platform. And I do understand indeed what was already said by, for example, Marieke, who said that it would offer a different alternative and that it might be very applicable to the average user. But the average user also has to care in that sense. And making people care starts with making people, first of all, imagine what we've now normalized online and how it would be very weird to have a similar situation in the offline world. Let's say when you are going to, I remember that we used to go to video rental stores such as Videoland when they were still there. Imagine that someone would follow me from the moment that I would get in and get my VHS, because the DVDs weren't a thing back, and that they would actually look at me when I would play it, if my screen, if the screen that I was using, if my eyes were on there, and when I was pausing it, when I would rewind it, and all these things. We would find that weird if that person would sit in my living room or bedroom and also take into consideration the actual location that I'm in, what other things I'm doing, what I'm eating maybe at the same time. All these things we consider to be weird in the offline world. But for some weird reason, we have normalized them in the online world. And I think this is kind of the crux to this whole discussion of the evening. How do we get control over this new type of normal? And I think the urgency for people like my mom comes with explaining how these things are so weird in the offline world, but have become normal in the online world. And that's by making this stuff not only transparent in the technical sense, but transparent by speaking a language that the average platform user speaks. And I hope that we as Fediverse kind of ambassadors are now able to speak that language and also make sure that people find it not only appealing to move there, but find it also urgent to move there.
Thank you so much. Beautiful to make that analogy between the online and the offline world. And indeed, I think someone also wrote about in a bar, it's normal that you can walk in, but you can as easily also walk out. And there's a lot of costs if you want to walk out of your current online bar where you have all your friends and your connections. So somehow we might want to increase this idea of mobility or portability of your data to move a bit more freely also in the online world. Last but not least, Reinier, I know you also have an account on the Fediverse. So I wonder what your reflection on this topic will be. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, it does make me happy, a lot more happy than the previous topic we discussed, because with more interoperability and control and ownership over what you put out, it would be a huge improvement. And some of the things I want to say have been said already, so let me try and steer away from that and answer the question of Imane, who is responsible? And I think usually when you have societal problems, you can look at the three main actors, which is the companies, governments, and individual citizens. And so far, I see that the big companies owned by billionaires do not really take their own responsibility. Also because the values that lie underneath the societies of the countries they're from might be different than ours. So they might have an entirely different view on who you should see as stakeholders and whether you should value all of your stakeholders or should just look at shareholder value creation. When it comes to the US-based companies and when it comes to the China-based companies like TikTok, there's an entirely different value set there as well. And since the companies are not taking their responsibility, they've created this addiction tool that I personally am also full on in. I compare it to smoking sometimes. Like I'd rather not do it, but from time to time, I do smoke a cigarette. It's the same with my social media. I'd rather not do it, but sometimes you just dive into it and you get drawn into it like that. And it's because they paid the most genius people of our time a lot of money to make these social media as addictive as possible. And I think since those companies are not taking their own responsibility, and since you cannot fully put that on the individual citizen, we can, of course, increase the media literacy that what Erik mentioned as well, which I'm in favor of, because there's always an own responsibility you have there. But I think government should also be more guiding and put up the guardrails of what is and what is not allowed. And I know that within the European Parliament, there's also legislation being created about making these social media less addictive. At the same time, even better than trying to guide those companies is creating an alternative which is European-wide, based on our values, and which is equally good to use without the negative elements. So that's my reflection on who is responsible.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to round off in about 5 more minutes. But if there's someone, oh, now I'm in the screen, maybe we can put everyone together again. So if someone wants to reply on one of the things that have been said, maybe Laurens, you've heard these politicians or probably soon to be politicians reply to your introduction story about the Fediverse, or if someone else wants to reply on what you've heard, this is your moment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can go in a little bit about Imana's questions about both who's responsible, but also like who's responsible both for managing the network, but also who's responsible for engaging with people and explaining of what it's there. And it, like, the real answer is, after writing for it on a year, is that the answer is actually really hard, and there's no clear answer. Like, I'm going to be honest with that, because otherwise we would be in a shiny, magical, happy universe right now, and everybody would be on the Fediverse and everything would be awesome. And we aren't. And we aren't because, honestly, the question of open source governance is really hard, and there's no structure that we can point to of like, hey, this is how we manage this infrastructure. And I think there's a first step of like, what can governments do and what can politicians do, is like try to, well, really also, I think actually what Volt is doing, of trying to reimagine of like, how does new forms of democratic governance structures on the internet in like 2023 and beyond actually look like? Because I wish I had the answer for you, but honestly, I kind of don't. And that's the real talk. But also, like, there's a second part for government here, is like, how can you entice people? And my experience is really, people only join when there's something very clear in them for themselves. And I think so as a government, but also like more public agencies, there's a step that have like, that serve a public purpose. There's the possibility to say like, okay, we serve a public purpose, we're going to put in the effort, and it's going to take a little bit more effort to also cross-post on the Fediverse, but we do it because it's important. And I think that part is the first step that you can do to entice people, because then there's actually content that they want to see, and that's how people join in the end, when there's something in it for them.
Yeah, thank you so much. You remind me of one of my favorite quotes. The best way to practice democracy is to practice democracy. And I think that is also very relevant for this whole Fediverse and internet governance, that we have to try. And now, I mean, the Swiss government, the Dutch government, they have their own services and people can follow them without an account. They are not fully in control. So the governments are experimenting and they're trying to see what happens. And yeah, that's probably the best way to go forward, is to at least try it and give it a chance. So I'm looking at our 4 other panel members. I'm going to give one of you the last word, and I'm just going to look into the eyes of Bjorn, Marieke, and Iman. If you really raise your hand, 2 of you, then of course you will both have the word. But is there one of you who wants to say some last words before we close this live stream? Bjorn, go for it.
Very short. I think the overall conversation that we've had now is finally about public values. And I think we now have a sort of momentum in which people are understanding that public values should also be reflected on the internet, and not that our public values should mold to the commercial values of other platforms that we've had now for the last 20 years. So let's start now with political programs such as Volt to normalize these new values that we'd like to also have on the internet, not the other way around.
Beautifully said. If Marika and Imane don't want to have any last words, then this is the end of the live stream. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Laurens, for bringing your expertise into our political movement. Thank you, Bjorn, Reinier, Marika, and Imane for spending your time on the preparation and on the discussion in this panel. And good luck with keeping on working on the political campaign to change the world for the better.